Hello everyone and welcome to our first series of Flipped collabs for A1A for teaching literacy. Welcome. My name's Rachel Couchy, for those of you who don't know or haven't had me before. We have two assessment choices, which is absolutely fantastic. We had some great feedback from students last time about really loving the choice and loving being able to choose which assignment suits them better, what their interests are, maybe what your skill-based is, I suppose. So we have design your own unit as one of our options. Our other option is not designing a unit, but analysing a unit that's already been given to you. So depending on whether you'd like to analyse a unit or come up with one yourself, I guess depends on which assessment is for you. So let's get started. I don't know why my slide did this to me in my last Collaborate too, where it got stuck. Now I'm not going to talk too much about, the logistics of the assignment. So as I've just copied and pasted this directly from the assessment details, I know that everybody can go and read that for themselves. I guess the important information is that it is due in week 6. Which is great. So it's always hard when you have an assignment due in week 4 or 5 because you feel like you've got to get started straight away and you probably can't put as much thought or spend as much time sort of sitting with the content before you've got to write your essay and quickly submit. So having something due in week 6 gives us time to sort of stew and ponder about the next few things that I'm going to talk about. Now, the way I want to structure this collab is not to try to answer everything here and now. So what we've tried to do is think about what's the top 5 things that you would need to know right now to get started. And these are some things that you can do in the next week or so before the interactive collab, and then hopefully come to the interactive collab to get further ideas and clarification about what you want to do and ask questions. So I don't mean to explain everything here today, but it is a good starting point if you follow some of these things. So this is Rachel's top 5 things that you need to know to get started with designing your own unit. So I've gone in a bit of an order here. So my number 1 thing to do is to connect to the Australian curriculum. Now, as teachers, what's really important is that we know the content. So we know the what of what we need to teach. So you need to choose a grade level. And initially our grade levels were from 3 to 6, but given the amount of students, the lovely early childhood students who are joining us for this unit, I do have permission from my lead unit coordinator to say that grade 2 is also acceptable, and I know that those students will be probably really happy about that. So if you're going to design your own unit, you are welcome to do from grade 2 to grade 6. Now, it doesn't mean that it's just early childhood students who could choose grade 2. It can be anybody. We've just increased that extra year just to give students more scope. With evaluating the unit, you still have to choose grade 4 because that's where the unit obviously has been drawn upon, so we can't make any changes to that one, so we apologise there. But definitely with this one, you have between grade 2 and 6. So you firstly need to become connected to, obviously once you've chosen a grade level, so say if I decide that I'm going to do a unit on grade 4, I have to then become aware of what the content is. I think some students got a little bit carried away in wondering about what their topic was going to be or what the focus was going to be, so they might have said to themselves, oh, it'd be really exciting if I did this book, or if it'd be really fun if I used this interactive video. So they were sort of starting from maybe topics like they wanted to do a narrative or they wanted to use a great video, but at the end of the day, we don't want to be choosing a topic and then trying to get the curriculum to fit around it. What I do in my work is that you look at the curriculum first. You get to know the curriculum. You understand the content descriptors for your specific age level. And then you think to yourself, what kind of unit can I develop to teach these skills? Not the other way around. So my advice to you is to start with the curriculum and design your unit around it. So for example, I'm pretty sure these are from grade 4. You jump in and you have a look at literacy and literature and language from your specific grade level, and I have decided to look at literature in terms of examining literature and language for interaction regarding literature. These are just some of the content descriptors I pulled out. Now, in your unit, you probably want 2 or 3 content descriptors that you're specifically going to focus on in your unit, and I have, for example, chosen these ones. So we're looking at things like discussing how language is used in different kind of settings, and also some of the language devices that can enhance meaning and shape the reader's reaction. I'm also looking for things specifically to do with vocab and to do with evaluative language. We're talking about conversations, so I'm going to have some sort of group work involved in my unit so that I can cover that specific outcome. So there's some of the things that I've pulled out of the curriculum, and I'm going to design my unit based off the things that the students need to learn. So start with the curriculum first. Look at what the students need to know. Do they need to be able to use interesting vocab and technical vocab? Do they have to have evaluative language? This is what your unit's going to be based around. Now, I have to apologize that my examples are all sort of reading based, but again, if you were doing writing, it's exactly the same thing. So you'd go in and have a look at what you think are writing content descriptors and things that are covered in writing, say like creating text, for example, and you'd base units around that. Now, if you're having trouble, you say, I don't know if this is about writing, what does this bit mean? Some of the content descriptors are really wordy and I don't know what they're getting at. You can always click on the little button that says elaborations, and that brings you sort of like a drop-down box with quite a number of elaborations that explain the content descriptors in a bit more detail and kind of a bit more straightforward language. So use the elaborations, and if you're still unsure of what it exactly means, then go to your ELA, because all your ELAs are experienced teachers. So if you go to them and say, I don't know what they mean when it says language devices and how we're going to shape the reader's reaction, what does that mean? What kind of things do I need to get the kids to do to be able to cover that within my unit? So start with the curriculum. Start this week. Choose a grade level firstly, and then have a look at your content descriptors and get really familiar with them for that particular grade level, and have a think about what your focus might be in terms of your content descriptors, not in terms of your content, in terms of like, will it be a reading focus? Will it be a writing focus? What are the reading content descriptors? What do the kids need to be able to do? Am I going to have like a comprehension focus? Have a look at the comprehension content descriptors and have a look at what you need to cover there. So it all starts from curriculum. Please don't go backwards and try to get a unit to fit in with the curriculum after you've designed it. It is really hard to do and it won't be as effective. So start with the curriculum first. Once you've got your head around your content descriptors and you know kind of where you're going, so I could say in terms of my one, I'm looking at, say, vocabulary, amongst other things. I then use what I know from the content descriptors to go off and find things that are going to help me with this unit. So if I know that vocabulary is an aspect within my unit, or in terms of enhancing students' vocabulary and expanding, I need to find resources that are going to support me in being able to do that. So I suppose with reading, it's going to be a lot of different texts that you might have to use. What texts lend themselves well to the content that you're trying to teach. If you're focusing on writing, there might be templates, there might be videos, there might be other texts that you're using as a model. There's lots of things that you're going to need to start gathering to put together to make a unit. So for example, I know that I have done lots of vocab work using The Sweetest Fig by Chris Van Osberg because I like some of the unknown vocabulary that is used within the books, but also there's lots of hidden features and themes throughout the book, and you can get the kids to do lots of great predicting and other stuff as well. So I've used that particular text as to base a unit around. So there might be other like really rich texts and things that you can find to help base your unit around. You could use a few different texts, you could have one text, there's no right or wrong answer as long as the kids are getting the content and doing those particular activities each week, I suppose, building on their skills. We also need to be able to understand pedagogy and multiliteracies, and this is my top 3 thing. So within our weekly overviews, I suppose, because, you know, this is a unit plan. It's not a lesson plan. So we're not going to be going into as much detail as lesson plans would have. Our weekly overview of the 6 weeks is going to be a paragraph or so about what's being covered. And within that, we need to talk about pedagogy. So it's really important that you get your head around now, and this is in terms of both assessments actually, that you understand that the pedagogy is the how of what we teach and the curriculum is the what. So once you've got your what, how are you going to teach this what? How are you going to teach vocabulary? How are you going to teach language for interaction? How are you going to teach comprehension strategies? So this is what we do to get the students to learn the content. There's lots of different pedagogical strategies that have sort of been covered already or touched on within the unit itself. So there could be things that are very literacy specific, like particular types of, you know, I've got things listed there like language experience, which is to do with writing or interactive writing or shared reading or guided reading, independent reading, for example. They're all things that are very literacy specific. But also you can use other pedagogical strategies that are perhaps used more widely within teaching. So you've got things like, you know, thinking about your specific groupings, modelling, visual thinking strategies, collaborating, the whole gradual release model could be used. And these are not things that are just only used in literacy. So you can collaborate in any subject, but you need to be able to show that you're using it effectively to teach these literacy strategies. So they're going to be covered in each of your lessons. So make it really clear to us when we have a look at your 6-week plan about what pedagogical strategies you will be covering. I know some beautiful students last time, they even bolded or perhaps wrote their pedagogical strategies in bold or in a different caps, just to show us that they were covered and we definitely weren't missing anything. So now that we've got our pedagogical strategies involved, we also need to know about multiliteracies, because this is also covered within the unit itself. So this needs to be embedded throughout the units, not just a focus on the use of ICT. If you're still not too sure about multiliteracies and can't quite get your head around what it means by these semiotic systems, then it might be worth skipping ahead to try to find, I'm not sure if it's in week 4 or 5, but there's a reading from McLaughlin, I think it's chapter 5, and it's called Multiliteracies. And even if you just had a squeeze over that to help you just understand what multiliteracies are and how you're going to use them in your planning. So it's just about making sure that you're covering all those senses. So when you're thinking about your planning, have you got something that's visual? Have you got something that's gestural? Have you got something that's audio, so that kids are getting information in lots and lots of different ways? So when you think about your high impact teaching strategies and you think about multiple exposures, you could be presenting information in a more visual way through an interactive whiteboard, but there might also be a video or some sort of sound thing that kids have to listen to too. So you're providing information in lots of different ways so that there's more chance of it, I suppose, being retained. My absolute favourite thing at the moment is Literacy Toolkit. Toolkit, yeah, that's right. So the Victorian government have this Literacy Toolkit, and it is so good for having a look at those pedagogical strategies, specifically things like shared reading and guided reading and whatnot, as well as writing stuff. It breaks down the full resources model, so if you're still struggling to understand what that means, it's such a great website. So definitely click on it and have a look, because that will give you support with some of those things. Another big facet of our unit plan is assessment, because we can't start a unit where we think the kids are at, and we can't have just a test at the end, which I'm sure sounds really prehistoric these days. I don't think anyone would suggest that that was good teaching practice. So I've just broken them down into the before, during, and after. So it's worth considering really early on in your sort of planning about thinking back to the curriculum and what the kids need to know. How are we going to know what the starting point is? How are we going to know what their prior knowledge is? Now, there is a little part in the template which calls for, I'm not sure what it's called. I think it's, student background knowledge. I did write it down there. So you have to fill in this thing called student background knowledge, as well as a whole section on assessment. So you do need to spend a bit of time now sort of reflecting on what students know. And I can just hear people say, oh, but Rachel, what do students know in this made-up grade? How are we going to know what they know? And I suppose the answer is the curriculum again. So if you know that your unit is based at a grade 4 level, have a look at the grade 3 curriculum. Have a look at what's come before, so that you know what students are building on. Now, we're just assuming, obviously, there'll be other people in the grade who are not at that specific point. But as a whole, in terms of trying to get something started with the unit, you could look at the grade level before and see where they've come from and where they're going to build on these skills. We'll talk about diverse learners in the next slide. And how are you going to assess that? So think of some interesting ways that you're going to gain this information from the students before the unit starts. You might have some things during, and I'm imagining that that's going to be, I suppose, a bit more formative in terms of how you're going to conduct the assessment, because we don't want to get through 6 weeks. Let's think of it really practically, that we don't want to get through 6 weeks of teaching to find out that A, B, and C students have no idea what I'm talking about. And it could have been something that could have been addressed back in week 2 or week 3 that I could have caught up with those particular students, and then the outcome could have been much different by the end. So, and it's not just at-risk students either, it's the grade as a whole, all students. How are you going to keep touch with them? What are you going to do to see that they're grasping the concepts that are being taught throughout the unit? So I was thinking things like, and we could talk about this more in your interactive collab, but just have a look at formative strategies, and you could do some research sort of based around sort of embedding formative assessment. I know I've got a good book by Dr. Dylan William where he talks about formative strategies, like getting the kids to hold up mini whiteboards. So you ask the students a question, they all write what they think the answer is on a mini whiteboard and just hold it up to you. And then you look through the sea of whiteboards to see if most people have got an idea or which ones should be concerned about. You could take some notes. You might do some conferencing, you might do hands up, traffic lights. So there's lots of little different techniques that you could do during the unit to sort of keep abreast of what's happening in terms of student understanding. I suppose at the end you probably want to do a little something to gauge how the unit's gone. So this assessment could be assessing the learning intentions and the rationale of the unit, because you want to bring it back to, well, you know, this is my content, this was my curriculum standards, this was my learning intentions. Well, did I manage to meet them? How am I going to assess if the students have actually learnt those things? It might be a good idea to have a little bit of a mix of formative and summative over the unit, because I just think that if you're covering both of those, you're showing us a greater understanding and what you know of assessment, rather than just having formative or summative things. So just a suggestion that a mix could be good. 30% of the mark goes to talking about diverse learners. So it's a really important thing that if you don't cover, you've got a little bit of a hole in, I suppose, the marks that can be awarded to you. So number 4 is inclusion of diverse learners. When you are writing your unit, and this is why it's one of the top 5 things to consider now, is to think really practically. You're in the classroom, you're about to plan this unit, but we all know that not everybody is at grade 4 level. There's going to be some above, some below, and how are we going to cater for them throughout the unit? So there could be different ways to show that you've differentiated things for students. So it could be in terms of different teaching approaches. So maybe one pedagogical strategy doesn't lend itself very well to students who are struggling with their reading or struggling with their writing. There might be teaching approaches that lend themselves better to kids who are quite bright and who can really fly along and go with it. So think about your teaching approaches and which ones lend themselves better to particular students. You might even arrange the content differently. So maybe certain students spend longer with different concepts. You might even have to look at, say if I was looking at a grade 4 unit, I would look at some of the grade 5 and grade 6 content, so I knew where my high flyers were going to need to be pushed to and how I can make sure that they're being catered to as well. I'm not sure about different assessments. It could be possible that students might need different assessments, or they just might need to be able to respond to assessments in different ways. So maybe some students don't. The more at-risk students might need more individual conferencing for you to check on how they're going. So just think about how you can have inclusion in your assessments as well. It's not just content related. So, thinking about different teaching approaches is a bit of an obvious one, but it also you can show differentiation in terms of your timing and in terms of your group flexibility. So you might suggest small groups for this particular child. You might have pairs because you want a buddy working with this particular child. So we don't have real case study to go off. So we're just assuming that there's going to be some students who might need to work in pairs for a particular activity, because if you're just making suggestions around that, or you can make suggestions about a particular group needing more time to spend, or they might have to cover something over 2 lessons rather than 1. So you're just showing that you've considered the diverse learners within the grade within your unit. This is not a top 5 thing, I don't think, but I just squeezed it in anyway because I know it's going to be something that gets asked a lot, and of course you can ask it in your interactive collab as well. We've got a template to use. So formatting should be very easy. So we've got our template, which is on this side, and all you are doing is filling it in. So you've got your questions there, you've got your subheadings there, and it all goes beautifully within the template. If you've got something that you've used on prac, you can use elements of that as well, or take parts of that and use them. You've just got to make it fit to our template and make sure that you're still covering the diverse learners and the pedagogical strategies. Keep that rubric in front of you and just make sure that it's covering the things that you need it to cover. But you can use ideas from prac lessons that you've developed, as long as they're yours as well. Now on this side is a question, something that I'm a little bit pleased about, because in the past this is taken directly from the annotated exemplar, which is now on the Padlet. You'll notice that we've got whole content descriptors listed in there. So if you want to, you still need to write English, Year 5 literacy, interpreting and analysing and evaluating, but you don't need to write out the description below. We're quite happy for you just to put the code, a hyperlinked code, so that we can click on it should we need to. So this is a full example, and these are the more moderated, scaled back examples. So you can use either or, but once you choose one, it's got to be consistent throughout your unit. So really important things to think about in terms of the rubric. We need the pedagogical strategies and assessments in line with the Australian curriculum, which we're going to do because we're starting with the Australian curriculum. If we get that open first and we build a unit around the Australian curriculum, there shouldn't be any issues with that. Your unit plan clearly explains its purpose and how it can support children's literacy development. So this is a big focus of the other assessment as well. This is why both of the assessments have the same learning outcomes, because we are evaluating the unit, whether it's a unit written by somebody else and we're evaluating it, or it's a unit we've written ourselves, we need to be able to talk about how it supports literacy development and how the strategies are used to support literacy. So you're going to have to do a lot of research and academic reading into how these pedagogical strategies support reading and writing. You have made considerations for diverse learners, and these align with the Australian curriculum, which is also my suggestion, to look at grade levels above and below so that you can make considerations for those who are struggling and those who are a little bit further ahead. And also you've got your own personal literacy, which is good, and I'm not sure why it says special there, and that's not very good because that's not great personal literacy. Thanks everyone for listening. As I said, this is just the top 5 things to get started, and I know it's not a comprehensive, detailed look at every part of the unit plan, so please come to the interactive collab, which is in week 3, because that's where we will have lots of brainstorming of ideas. We can talk about what your unit plan could be about in terms of content. We'll look at some examples, so it's important for you to, if you can't quite make it in week 3, that you have a look at the recording. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you in the interactive collab.